might not expect to find Hemingway in a 90s romance movie, but there I was, watching Nicolas Cage read A Moveable Feast to Meg Ryan in City of Angels. It wasn't an academic introduction for sure, but I was sold. When I finally sat down with the real thing, I expected a well-written food memoir. But Hemingway, it turns out, was not writing about eating, but about living, about art, about what it means for life to feed the artist and art to feed life. When you hear the name Hemingway, it might conjure up memories of the old man and the sea or For Whom the Bell Tolls, big blustery adventure stories of a sort. But A Moveable Feast is about Paris in the 1920s, and so it puts you in a time and place almost as integral to the author as the stories that made his name. The city was filled with writers and artists who belonged to the so-called lost generation, people marooned by the First World War. There's never an ending to Paris, he writes, and the memory of each person who has lived in it differs from that of any other. Hopelessly romantic and overcooked, yes, but it's heavy too. And because he was a writer in Paris, and because he was making friends with people who would soon change the course of modern literature forever, Hemingway was immersed in a city and a community seeping and dripping with possibility. Through friendships with the likes of F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, and Ezra Pound, he not only grew as a writer, but the very texture of his writing would change because of the relationships he built. And what struck me about these friendships was how, on the one hand, they seemed so casual, yet so monumental. Take his friendship with Fitzgerald, for instance. They spent a day talking about writing, about life, about love, about everything. How much of an artist's entire worldview can be adapted into one chance conversation over an afternoon? The book illuminates how life is fed by art and connection. I was expecting a book filled with descriptions of cafés, of bistros, and there are those naturally, but what we get in A Moveable Feast is hunger for something deeper than a well-filled stomach. Hemingway hungered for knowledge, for experience, for meaning. And above all, the ravenous writer yearned for the meaning of life, and his favorite perch was that table by the window in a cafe, trying to write and using hunger itself as a spur to concentration. You got very hungry when you'd not eat enough in Paris, he writes, but you could not blame Paris when you missed the food. Here, hunger is a physical metaphor for creative and personal longing. I could also relate this to my own experiences. I've had these moments when an act of work sustains me too. And there's a reason why we say that we're feeding the spirit. And in A Moveable Feast, that's precisely what Hemingway does with his living and his looking and his thinking and his creating. The meals become incidental. But what's not incidental is my plea for you to hit that subscribe button. It helps keep the channel going, delivering content like this, and you get an alert when it comes out. But back to the subject at hand. Of course, there's more to Hemingway's Paris than writing and thinking. He also writes about his love life, particularly his first marriage to Hadley. These passages are so intimate. Hemingway was a titan of literature, but he was also a fragile human being, and here he is talking about his failings and flaws. He reveals the tragedy that ended his marriage and the loss of a suitcase that contained so much of his work never recovered. And in this sense, the book is a confessional. It shows what art, or love, can cost you. Perhaps most surprising of all is how the book is unsparing its discussion of his craft. Hemingway is not a romantic about writing. Instead, much of his discussion of the art is straight talk, just as bare bones as the rest of his fiction. He talks about times when writing was difficult and times when it was easy. He offers advice that is as useful today as it was 70 years ago. All you have to do is write one true sentence. Write the truest sentence that you know. I've written a fair bit, and Hemingway's words were refreshing. Writing does not have to be good. Writing has to be true. And food keeps popping up throughout A Moveable Feast, but it's rarely even a sub-theme. The meals are spare. Bread, wine, oysters. And they're usually an excuse for and a backdrop to the conversations and reflections that are the engine of the book. One of his scenes involves eating with friends. The point is not the food, but the feeling of being part of something greater than yourself. We ate well and cheaply and drank well and cheaply and slept well and warmed together and loved each other, he writes. The food is the detail, but the company, the atmosphere of communal life, the happiness of being alive, these are the point. It has to be this that makes A Moveable Feast so enduring. It speaks to experiences that are common to us all: longing, making, love, loss. I teach English and psychology, and I often find myself thinking about how literature can be said to provide a lesson for life. A Moveable Feast is only one example. Hemingway strove for meaning in a world that was being redefined. Really, we all hunger after something more, whether it's a purpose, an anchor, or a legacy. And in the end, of course, A Moveable Feast is not a book about food at all, but about the things that nourish us more deeply. And above all, memory. Life is the whole composed by slivers of moments that if you turn them this way and that are richer than they look. That, anyway, is what I remembered about it. It's not a book about Paris or about the meals Hemingway ate. It goes deeper to the things that really feed us. And if you enjoyed this video, you know the drill. Like, share, and subscribe. We're getting closer and closer to our goal of 1,000 subscribers thanks to viewers like you. And until the next video release, you might check this one out next.